Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our second virtual composition masterclass as part of the Elizabeth Henriksen mentorship program. My name is Megan DeGiorgio. I'm the Director of Education Advancement for Boulanger Initiative. Just a tiny bit about this event that we're having tonight. As I said, it's part of our mentorship program. So this program has been going on over the course of sort of the second half of 2021. We have three fabulous mentors. One of them is with us here tonight, Nina C. Young. And we also have Alexandra Gardiner and Inti Figgis-Vizueta. So each of them are offering one masterclass to our three mentees who are paired with each of our mentors. So this is our second one. And so you're going to get to meet each of our mentees and hear their music tonight and hear some feedback from Nina about their work. I want to bring your attention to just two upcoming public events that we have, again, as part of this mentorship program. Next week, October 26th, we have a solo instrument composition workshop. So this is a little bit of a different program, still under the umbrella of the mentorship program. This event is for young composers who are young women of marginalized genders who are aged 13 to 18, and they get to submit pieces for a solo instrument. They get to hear them performed live virtually, and they get feedback from one of our composer mentors. So, like I said, next Tuesday, October 26th at 7 o'clock Eastern Time, we have our violin workshop. So we have some great student pieces, and we have our fabulous performance ambassador, Adrienne Munden-Dixon, and Inti Figgis-Vizueta will be our composer mentor for that. And also with Inti, our next composition masterclass with our mentees, like the event that we're having tonight, is on November 15th from 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock Eastern Time. So be on the lookout for both of those. Those will be live streams as well, just like tonight. There is information at the link that's going across the screen, as well as in the chat. But I don't want to delay our main event any farther. So tonight we have our masterclass with Nina Young. We are going to start with Diana Lynch. Her piece Blaze will be the first one we're going to hear tonight. So I will let them just take it away.
Thank you so much, Diana, Megan, and hi, Diana. Sorry, it's the names on the screen. I'm really excited about the piece that you're going to play today. So I thought to get started, would you tell us a little bit about the project, some background information, who's performing, when did you write it?
Of course. So the piece that we're going to listen to today is called Blaze, and it was inspired by the wildfires last year. I'm from Colorado, and we had the worst wildfire season we've ever had. And we were just really, I felt it most like in just like the ever-present presence of smoke everywhere and ash in the air for months on end. And so I was really inspired by that. And so I did a little bit more research about like forests and fires and everything. And I found that there's a special tree in Colorado called the lodgepole pine. And what's special about that tree is it's pine cones or serotinous cones. And so that means that they're covered in sap and they only release their seeds when they're introduced to extreme heat, like a fire. And so basically the way that the lodgepole pine grows is from wildfire. So it's like a natural way that the tree grows. And I thought that was really inspiring and really hopeful in like the hardness of what was last year. So I found that as like a source of hope, and I decided to write a piece about it. The piece, I wrote it for the Boulder Altitude Directive, which is an ensemble in Boulder, Colorado, and they specialize in playing new music. And I wrote the piece in March, and they played it in April. Well, I wrote it I finished it in March, so it wasn't written all in 1 month, but yeah, so they played it in April, and that's it.
One thing before we listen, because I know it's going to come and pop up on the screen soon, can you tell us a little bit about, you made a painting?
Yeah, lately I've been really interested in painting and like I don't know, like visual art's been really like part of my compositional process, I guess you could say. And so I took the score and I ripped it up and I painted a picture and I used the score as like the flames of the picture of the fire. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I find the picture really visceral and beautiful, and the fact that it has score, which represents motion and time, makes me feel like we're witnessing something that's ever changing instead of a two-dimensional fixed image. So it's very inspiring. All right, let's take a listen. It's a very beautiful and evocative piece, and I feel, yeah, I love this suspended feeling of the ending after the two sections of really vigorous motion. Starting first, I think you really embody the idea of a little spark and a flame in the beginning, and it grows through the rhythmic kind of staccato gestures that you're using. Along with starting, I like how the piece starts and ends in the upper registers, acoustic registers, but they mean two different things. So it's like we're seeing the beginning and the ending as flip sides. And I imagine in the beginning, it's almost like I'm looking down and I'm watching the little sparks. At the ending, I'm looking up and finding everything falling onto me. And yeah, very, very gorgeous. And I think you did well with the Puro instrumentation without even using a bass clarinet.
Thank you.
And I like how you structured the piece basically in three parts. So in a three-part form, with the first two kind of really moving together very smoothly, and you're using harmonic language as a way to differentiate the two forms. So we start in a very diatonic world, and then enter to chromaticism in the kind of the big fire, and then go back into this kind of purity of sound at the ending. I also think it's very evocative how you start the piece with the sandpaper block. You are actually lighting a match. We can light a match on sandpaper. And I think this is something we don't get to enjoy or appreciate right now when we're listening to a recording, but the visceral nature of that visual gesture when watching a performance of this piece live, I think could be very powerful. And so I'm curious, when the piece was performed, was it kind of hidden in the back, or was it something, I guess, well, maybe it wasn't performed, it was just recorded internally.
Yeah, it was just a recording.
Is that something that you would want? Do you want the visual recognition of this, or is it just a sound?
I think the visual would be really cool. I think that would look really cool.
I think that you could actually mark something in the score then theatrically if you want, similar to like when trumpets are supposed to go like bells up and that kind of thing, where you can say like, lift ahead above and show this gesture of striking, because that's really the impetus that sets the entire ensemble in flames. I also want to compliment you on the rhythmic drive of the piece. It never feels tiresome, and the proportions are really satisfying. But I don't feel like they've gone on too long or they've passed too quickly. And then when we finally get to the suspended section at the end, we get the relief of the constant eighth note motion. That then gets divided, obviously, into 16th notes later on. And you were really good at creating a sense of groove within square meters, which I think is impressive. So for those of you who aren't looking at the score, it's mostly in 3/4 and 4/4, but then there are sections of 5/4 as well. And you're choosing to go back and forth when you need to set up the groove. One of the things I want to ask you is, how come you don't have any 5/8, 7/8, 9/8 somewhere in there? 3/8. There was a 3/8 somewhere, actually. Wasn't there? Am I remembering that incorrectly?
Oh, there's a couple, but not very many.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't really know why I didn't really use a whole lot of the like 9/8, 3/8. I just kind of felt it and just went with it. Yeah.
So what I'm about to say is not a criticism of the piece. It's just to talk about a kind of like another technique that you could employ in future pieces that have this kind of driving perpetual motion of rhythmic force. Mm-hmm. So when we're doing things in something 4 meters, we end up feeling the duple pulse all the time, even when you're going back and forth between 5/4, 3/4. 4/4, and you're doing a lot of rhythmic groove stuff by offsetting patterns within your box structure. But everything then does eventually come back to some kind of cyclic downbeat in phrase structure as well. And that's one of the things that's actually very satisfying about this piece. But one of the things that like I think is a cool technique is to occasionally either push ahead or push back to suspend that predictable phrase structure. And that can bring even more excitement, you know, to prolong it a little bit. And everybody's like, oh, wait, I thought we were going to get, you know, a phrase or like a larger phrase downbeat somewhere. And instead you can offset it by an eighth note, either plus or minus. And then we feel like it's as though, you know, you had a gear and then suddenly everything started skipping backwards. Or, you know, if you're watching a movie and there's a bicycle, and sometimes if the sampling rate is incorrect, then it looks like the bicycle wheel starts to go backwards, even though we know it's actually going forwards. Or the same, we can do this effect with a strobe light as well. And so this is a really like fun perceptual game. So I'd encourage you in some future project that has a kind of perpetual motion like this to explore what happens when it's not really a 9/8 or a 5/8. It's really like a 4/4 plus 1/8. Or, you know, to think about the 7/8 as being a 4/4 minus 1/8, so that we end up putting emphasis on the and structure instead. And this can make some like really interesting patterning. So that's just a little idea that you might want to look at in some future pieces. You want to tell me a little bit about the percussion instrumentation and choices? We talked about the sandpaper block, but I'm curious about everything else. How much say did you have in that?
I had all the say. Yeah, I had pretty much free reign. I'm like, I don't know, I'm a little bit afraid of percussion, and this was like one of my first like actual like experience. Well, I mean, I've written like percussion like large ensemble pieces, but I mean, I guess this isn't a large ensemble, but I don't know. Percussion has always been like something that's been kind of scary for me, and so this was like the first like piece where I was like trying to be a little bit more adventurous. I mean, I know I wasn't that adventurous, but for me, it was like it was an adventure.
So, I mean, I would like to, we can categorize, you're not just sticking with one type of percussion instruments. You're not just sticking with, or like instrumentation. You're not just sticking with either pitched or unpitched or just skins or just metal. You really are giving yourself a wide sonic palette. And I think that perhaps in the storytelling that you were trying to make with this piece, that might have informed some of these choices. But I think it's really interesting, like the percussion gets to be this creative sort of substitute to electronic sounds sometimes, because you have one person who can bring so many different timbres to the table. And I like that. And I also like how in the last part of the piece, we actually hear the metals as these resonant objects, whereas everything else earlier in the piece, we really hear the skins and these, I don't want to call them woods because you don't actually have any wood instruments really. But that might be something to explore in a future piece, like what would happen if you had temple blocks. They can be very resonant too. And just like with higher pitched metals, for example, even crotales or glockenspiel a little bit, because the timbres, the frequencies are so high, we can blend them with a lot of pitched material in middle and lower registers where it seems like it wouldn't make sense. And it kind of just gives this tarnished flavor to everything that you're writing. And the wood blocks and temple blocks can do the same because they actually have so much pitch packed into them at higher frequencies. So they blend really beautifully while also making a really resonant sound. But so I like the way that you also structurally differentiate the form. And in the ash falling, you really do suspend the idea of sound by having these instruments bowed. The vibraphone is bowed for much of it. One thing I'm going to ask is, how much work have you done with harmonics on string instruments?
Not a whole lot.
So how would you categorize the harmonics that you use in the last part of the piece, the ashes falling?
What do you mean by categorize? Like what type of categories?
So yeah, like why did you choose to use harmonics at all in the string instruments instead of just having so if we go to page 16, we could start there, score page 16. So tell me about the choice of putting the violin and the cello there. Was it for a particular type of sound? Was it to just get the high pitches in a more easy way? Did you want vibrato? Did you not want vibrato?
I think that harmonics sound like really glassy and like, I don't know, kind of airy, I guess. And I just wanted it to be kind of like I wanted it to feel suspended. And so I felt like the harmonics lent itself well to like being like this constant like suspension sort of thing to create that environment.
Absolutely. And so if we look at the score, the type of harmonics that you're using are what we would call touched fourth harmonics, right? So that happens where the string player puts a finger down on the fundamental and then touches a fourth above it, and then we hear that pitch 2 octaves higher. And one of the things with that kind of harmonic is you have the ability to actually slide between pitches if you wanted to, right? You can do glissandos in this way. So the player is very much in charge of the intonation that's happening here. The other kind of harmonics that we have are natural harmonics, and that's where we just touch nodes on the instrument. So if we actually go to page 17, violin 1, the last measure of the first system on that page, we'll see that you have what is a touched fourth harmonic. You have, or could be, you have the perhaps open A string with the finger touching a D above it. So we're going to hear A 2 octaves higher. Is there another way that you could achieve that harmonic? Like, is it really a touched fourth, or is that a harmonic that lives on the A string by itself? A natural harmonic.
Yeah, it could be a natural harmonic.
Okay, right. So here you have a flavor choice, and harmonics, like in your playback, it's going to end up playing them the same way. But if you ask a violin friend or a cello friend or a viola friend to show you the difference between this touched fourth harmonic and a natural harmonic, the natural harmonic is going to sound a little bit, as you said, airier in some ways. It also is going to have intonation that's a little bit different, because depending on how the instrument was tuned and depending on what the harmonic is, how far up the harmonic series, it actually starts to be purer intervals, which are against what the piano and the vibraphone would be tuned to. So it can actually create this beautiful fuzziness and kind of a bit of a gorgeous conflict between our tempered pitch system and the pitch system of strings. You can do harmonics with the flute and actually the clarinet as well too. And of course, like, you can, the embouchure, the intonation can be adjusted just as you can with the touched fourth or touched third or any touched harmonic on the string instruments, but you have the ability to, with certain ones that work on the open strings, to open up a whole other world of sounds. And that might be something interesting to explore, like what happens if the cello is playing some natural harmonics and the violin is playing touched harmonics, and sometimes they're both playing natural harmonics. Another thing that you could do with the touched fourth harmonics in this passage of falling is you could do very, very, very slow glissandos, where we're floating downwards. And there's going to be some other things that you could explore or connect the dots with perhaps in another piece or in a future edit. I don't know what your feelings are about all of this.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that this, you get to play with this duality of pitch when you have fixed pitch instruments with keys like piano or vibraphone, and then instruments with more flexible pitch choices. So like, for example, like a barbershop quartet, that's super, super in tune, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's super in tune, but it wouldn't be in tune with a piano at all. Right? Because the piano actually can't get that in tune. Because it's a compromise, and it's a compromise that we've learned to accept in our ears for the most part as being the right thing. But when people are playing without piano or without this kind of fixed pitched instrument, musicians tend to hear the purity of these just intervals and actually adjust in real time and with expressive intonation ways to make really color choices about what they're going to play. You know, what kind of third do you want? Do you want it to be sharper or flatter? You know, you have the ability to decide these things. And so that's a really interesting thing to look at, like when you're writing a string quartet or something like that. But when you start to mix these worlds together, you also can sort of force some of these differences and choices when you choose to use natural harmonics. That I think could be pretty interesting. So my last little comment that I want to say is I really love your painting, and I love the visceral nature of this piece. And I don't know if you ever thought about making a video to go along with it.
I haven't thought about much, but that'd be cool.
It would be super cool. Like I could even imagine making like a series of paintings and using different animation software or even stop motion. You could actually get some of this to respond to the music. It could be a really fun project. You know, if you want to do something in the future, like use this as a springboard to turn this into another piece of art. Oh wait, actually, I have one more thing. So you said that you you like to use visual art in your composing practice. And that you made this painting by cutting up the score that you had already written. Have you ever used painting or drawing or this visual art practice as a way to start a piece?
Yeah, I've actually been doing that a lot this past year, where it's not as like put together as this, but it's more of like just like thinking of like colors and shapes and like how it goes. And so I usually do that before I write any notes. And well, at least lately, I've been doing that. So
that's great. I think you should, just keep on going with that. It's really good to find a bunch of ways that we can creatively inspire ourselves to make music even when we're stuck. And so if drawing and painting and working with your hands and making something helps you to generate sound or ideas or form, gesture, line, or whatever it is, go for it. And whenever you're feeling stuck, know that you have these different outlets as ways to just get that sonic or idea seed started that will spring forth, hopefully, more music. Well, do you have anything you want to add, Diana?
I just want to thank you so much for all of your kind words. I'm just really excited to be here. So yeah, thank you so much.
It's a great piece. I hope I get to hear it again sometime live.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. So expressive and evocative. I really enjoyed listening to it and also hearing, Nina, your comments about it. So I think we will move on to our next piece. So next we're going to hear Julie's Imperfect Circles is the name of her piece. So we can put Julie on stage with us.
Hi, Julie.
Hello. All right, and I will let you two take it away.
Okay, well, it's great to see you on here. and I'm excited to dive into your piece, Imperfect Circles. So can you give us some backstory about this? What is the
Yeah,
piece? What is the title? Why'd you make it? Who is it for? What are we listening to?
great questions. So this piece is not a real, it's a draft of a piece. And there's a pianist, Nick Gerpy, who's doing, so he, Macrocosmos, George Crumb's, with all the different movements for the different signs and things. He performs that, and he's commissioned 12 response pieces for each of the 12 signs in Macrocosmos. So I think I'm Libra. I can't remember, but which sign it is, but it is the mini movement is called the Magic Circle of Infinity. And it's like a classic George Crumb circle score. So anyway, each of the movements are like 1 or 2 or 3 minutes. So that's the kind of time span. And it can be for amplified piano or fixed electronics, but not live electronics or anything like that. So that's kind of the limitation. And so what this draft is I asked him to record it. I sent him this score. It's like 2 pages. It's very kind of loose and easy, and just asked him to record it a few times. And then I was just kind of playing with it and thinking about different things that I could make with a fixed media track. So it's it's just a draft.
So
And
let me, sorry. So you sent him the score. He used this as a creative prompt and then is sending you back the recordings, and then you're making an electronic track that's a standalone piece, or that he's going to perform along with this or something else?
that he will play with.
Okay,
So
cool.
there'll be a live part. So in the recording that I sent, there's like a foregrounded piano part where he's just playing the part that's written. And then there's a background part that is like a processed version of different versions of that recording, different speeds. So mainly timing is the main thing that changes.
Awesome.
Yeah. So
Okay.
yeah, main score could change and the whole thing could change, but this is what it is today.
Okay, so we have proof of concept.
It's a proof of concept. That's right.
Okay, let's put up the score if we can. And listen. It's very beautiful. I feel suspended right now in a different way than in the other piece. I don't feel imperfect, but I feel perfectly suspended. Um, I went to a piano recital by Robert Fleitz at Weil Recital Hall a couple of days ago. And the programming was really beautiful. And I was like really happy that it was a smaller space because the last piece that he played really concentrated on the resonance of the piano. And I became sad during the performance because I knew that the power of the resonance where Robert was playing was immense and that he was just bathing in this sound because he was so close to the instrument. And then us in the audience, we were only hearing a tiny, tiny vestige of the power of what was there. And I thought, oh, this is like one of those pieces where you really need to like just all gather around the piano so you can hear the imperfections of all of these strings beating and melding with one another. And I thought, well, this is one of those times where we need amplification, or this is going to sound so good on a record, but it's always going to fall somewhat short for. And I was like, but he loves playing it because he's inside the sound, and I know it's luscious over there. What I think your piece does is it allows all of us to feel the lusciousness of the sound and the resonance through the electronics, right? So you're creating these echoes of resonance that are building up from the recording with the pedal. And this is allowing, I could imagine that in performance, this would allow us to suspend this acoustic imperfection and give us all the opportunity to imagine more accurately the wonderful world that exists when you put your head near the piano with the lid open. You know, the swirling sounds where it's different because of the way the lid opens and we're hearing different reflections. So no matter where you stand, it's always different. And here through these scalar arpeggiated passages that you have going up and down and then building that resonance with the electronics, we get to spin those sounds around our head. And I find that I feel like you finally gave me resolution to my feeling of sadness that I had from this recital. So thank you for that. So one of the things I want to, anybody who's tuning into this is to notice the different possibilities that we can approach when using a score. And so in the last piece, we had an ensemble piece with very fixed timing. And this score is this choreographic way for everyone to join and to meet each other within a grid of time. So we think, okay, the score is a way to organize time. Well, Julie is also organizing time, but the score here is open-ended and gives the performer a lot of agency in the decisions that one is making through the idea of inhaling and exhaling and even finding one's own pulse to set the tempo of the second page. So Julie, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about this choice and how these kinds of decisions are featured in your work.
I guess I've been a little bit obsessed with this idea of playing things to the speed of your breath, because when I sit down to play the piano, trying to do that, I feel like it's like literally a workout, and I feel so like connected to this thing. And it also will change, like when I sit down, my breaths are a certain length, and then when, after I've done it a few times, I'm like actually like, it's like part meditation and part piano, and sometimes I'm focused on the piano part, sometimes I'm focused on the breathing part. So I just think it's this really interesting thing to kind of like use as a container. But it also can be, it can also, then you lose control of timing in a certain way. So it's also something where like feeling when these echoes came in, and then like, oh, they were like a little late, or like that was a little slow, and you kind of give up some of that control. So it's a little bit of a catch-22. but
How are
it's,
you mitigate that? Sorry, go ahead. I'll ask you this in a second.
oh, I was just going to say it's similar with the pulse because there are things you can do to make it go faster or make it go slower. It's not actually connected with your breath, except if you hold your breath, your pulse does slow down.
So just don't breathe when you're playing.
Hopefully not to a stop, but yeah, right. No breathing. So they're like two kind of parallel things, but they have some overlaps, and I think there's just more there to figure out. What were you gonna ask?
So I want to ask, it's very interesting to me that you're creating this extremely flexible world with fixed electronics, with fixed media.
Yeah.
And one of the solutions when doing mixed music, so music for acoustic instruments, and some kind of electronic sound, we have like a bunch of options. We can have a fixed media track with or without a click track. We can have fixed media samples that are triggered. And so this allows for buffer room of timing. So you get to a particular event and then you trigger a new sample and they can overlap, or we have live processing in which and a mix of all of these things in which the performer agency for timing doesn't really have such or you're not fighting against some fixed time element. And one would inherently, based on that description, be like, oh, well, then of course live is always better, but no, it's not. It's not always better for many reasons. And there might be something artistically beautiful to say about the tension between a fixed, something that we know is going to happen the same way every time, which is, if we start to philosophize about that, it's really interesting and frightening. And the idea of every performance being a totally new experience where anything can happen. And so what happens when these worlds live together? And so I'm a little curious about maybe what your thoughts are on that, or since you're in the exploratory process of this piece, where do you think you're going to go with this tension?
Well, I think for the way that I'm thinking of dealing with it right now is that this person has to wait in a way for this past version of themselves. So they do inhale, exhale, and then they have to wait until, so there is this almost fixed thing. This wave has to happen and then you start again. So you're kind of in a concert, you're forced, or even and when you're practicing, you're forced to kind of remember your speed at a different time. So it's I don't know, to wait for yourself somehow, or wait for the old version of yourself. So that's one possibility, is because if I think, for the ease of it, I think for him to feel comfortable with it, he's going to want to push play at the beginning and not do anything else the whole time. So thinking about how I can sync him up to this, I think it is going to be a matter of there's an inhale and then this thing has to happen during the exhale. So you have to maybe control how fast that's happening. And then at what point can the inhale happen again? And also what you were talking to Diane about with meter and time. And I do sometimes fall into these patterns. And as I was listening to it, I was thinking about how little changes throughout it and how I think it needs a little more change, especially because it is so short. It just needs a little bit more. So I'm thinking of changing things a little bit more, and also thinking of stretching time a little bit more, especially in that second section with the pulse part, just making those a little more stretched and a little less predictable and yeah. So that was partly an answer to your question and partly a new tangent.
One of the things I could imagine, so if I'm looking at the score on the first page, I get the impression that the general pacing of each system, and each system in this case is pretty much a phrase here, so that each system is about the same has the same character.
Mm-hmm.
And so it doesn't leave room for me thinking, oh, I'm going to take a deeper breath and I'm going to like start off slower. And then as I run out of air, I'm going to get to the top and have to go closer together. You know, there isn't this compression and stretching of time that I don't feel like I have the privilege to get to explore that, because I think that I have to be very kind of like zen and even.
Mm-hmm.
Despite the fact that there is, you know, I'm in my own time, but my time has to be regular across all 4 systems. And maybe this isn't true. And I think there are like there are different ways that one could explore. So you could have the distance between notes shift a little bit if you wanted, you know, sometimes to have closer to, you know, you don't have to like ascribe like a 30-second note or a whole note or something like that. Just, you know, our visual understanding of things closer together happening faster, and then further apart being more stretched.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine also each of these lines basically sits within the same registral category. So is there the opportunity to float higher up and or lower down at times?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, like, yeah, does this piece have a time restriction? Because I feel like you could spend ages actually in the first page. And you're talking about extending the second page, but you could also spend much more time on the first page.
It's supposed to be like 2 minutes. So it can only get shorter because it's like almost 3.
Okay.
But
well, maybe like a version for another project that
mm-hmm.
you could play with this idea and pull it out.
Mm-hmm.
Because another thing I could imagine, you know, like somebody who is going to be like, okay, I want to play this piece. And what would be cool is like if they had to record their own fixed media track every time they were doing it. And so this would be more of an interactive version. But what if they have to record like 6 versions of themselves playing each system, faster, slower, medium, and then they don't know which echo is going to come out?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So like each time they play it, you know, the first system, like, oh, I'm going to get like 1 of 6 choices. Which one will it be? And will that influence how you play the second system? And then what echo will they receive from there? So it makes, it brings this element of the system not just following the human, but the human also really being influenced by the choices of the system.
Yeah, that's a really
which if
good
we're thinking about
Mm-hmm.
like, you know, wow, I just forgot like in an astrological sense, you know, we have all of the different signs and they're, you know, people take readings and we can be influenced by these things, or are we the ones who've arbitrarily created that, you know, who's in control of the system? And,
well, the
and
stars,
is anybody
stars are in control, Nina. Let's not.
yeah, the stars are in control, right? And so and then as the stars are in control, we change ourselves and then we make these predictions, which then maybe controls how we think about that and how other people think about these things, right? It's like this really cyclical pattern that I think that might be an interesting, curious thing.
That's very true. I got very attached to the limit of this, that this is the thing that happens, and I played a lot with like, what if it was like but I something about like just how small this is, but I think that even within this there's still a lot more that can open up, or maybe it's this 3 times.
Well, maybe it's the timing too, like the distance between notes.
Yep. Yeah.
You know, like what happens if you're like, oh, I'm gonna take, you know, it's like inhale and exhale, but we can have, you know, where you're surprised and then you actually suspend yourself. So maybe, I don't know, maybe like a fun game would be to practice to come up with all the different kinds of inhales and exhales that one might have based on emotional response, and sort of see like, what are those lines?
Yeah, I like that idea because I'm already thinking of I'm already kind of affecting my breath depending on it already is this thing you're like kind of controlling just by thinking about it. As soon as you start thinking about the way you're breathing, you start kind of controlling it. So, yeah, that can definitely be. And then, I would really love if breathing. I need to do more experiments with, like, if you breathe faster, if you breathe slower, your heart slows down. But if you breathe faster, does your heart speed up? And then maybe that can be a possible connection too. And then you have a nice little like heart slow down thing happening. Although it just like sets the beat and then they stop listening to it as much, but it could be something. It could get a little more fire in that first part with a little faster heart going on. Move it on a little, make it a little shorter so the first part could be a little longer.
I mean, yeah, I think there are lots of options. Also, I was thinking like, oh, if you have performance nerves and your pulse is faster, that could significantly change the piece. And I kind of like that the same person, when put in different situations, would if they're going to play it honestly, would have to play this piece very differently. But then that also brings up the question of the electronics for the second part of the piece. For what I could hear in the mock-up that you made, are following a similar process to the first page, but with the material of the second. Was that true?
Following the material.
What was the echo of? It was echo, right, for the second page?
Yeah. It's basically the same. It's just happening faster. Yeah.
So what are you gonna do if somebody gets there sooner or later?
I think I'm gonna loop the last two measures, and they have to repeat it until it catches
until it runs out.
Or something has to happen at the end of each scale upward. There's some kind of thing. But I think the thing is, if they're performing, they would be playing faster than they recorded. If they're nervous, it would be faster. And so being ahead
is okay.
I think so. I don't know. There are more questions too.
Yeah, this is the part that's the only part that makes me a little nervous. Which is funny because it's the pulse part. Is what to do. So I think either having a strategy, either being okay with the fact that these things might be totally misaligned, and if the piece is like made for that, then that's great. If you're going to be upset that they're misaligned, then what kind of strategies can you put into the score to give us an understanding of that? So even like, for example, you were saying that on the first page that the performer has to wait until the echo of themselves has expired before starting the next system or the next phrase. When you go to make the final version of this, I think that needs to be reflected somehow in the notation. Like maybe you have a comma or you have some sort of notational marker that you can explain in the off score in the beginning and the notes that this is how one does it. Because otherwise it might be like, do you want a cascading nature where, you start the next one while the other one is still finishing, or do we actually wait?
Right. Yep. Yeah, I need to kind of decide about those details. And some of it too is like, it's so different than just arranging it in a DAW, because like knowing what you're listening for so you can start the next thing. I think I just need to like play it a few times and see what makes the most sense, kind of. What I'm listening for. Yeah.
Yeah, and then maybe, if you want to think about, it depends if you're thinking about this as a piece just for this person or a piece in general. It might be, you might want to go solicit a few other friends to look at the score and give you their interpretation so you can have more data points on like what the wide range could be. I mean, that might just be interesting as a personal like musical experiment, and it's for to think about similar projects in the future and what the sort of room for difference might be.
Yeah,
and like what does that say about the notation that you're using? Like, what does what you put on the page, how does that influence the interpretation of someone seeing it?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think I got lulled into a false sense of security because he played it pretty much how I played it with a few little things, but I like the idea. I think especially somebody who maybe improvises a lot, giving this to them and seeing what they did with it would probably be very different. And it could be a way of getting some new ideas. I like that idea.
Yeah, just it'd be fun to just to use this as an opportunity to explore, maybe not even for this project, but maybe it'll just shed light into something that you'll be able to tap into in the future.
Yeah, very
Okay.
cool. I like it. Thanks, Nina.
Yeah, very beautiful. I can't wait to hear the finished thing. And I'm a huge fan of the macrocosmos. So
Nice. Me too.
I did one of my doctoral exams on the second one. So.
Oh, wow. Oh, cool. Good choice.
All right. Thank you so much. That is such a cool concept. I really liked getting to, see how it all worked and how it was all constructed. That was really neat. So awesome. All right. So we will now move on to our last piece written by Connie called Cadenza Study. So we can bring her up onto here she is. Hi, Connie. And yeah, go right ahead.
Hi, Connie. Thank you for joining. And I'm excited to dig into your Cadenza study. So as with everyone else, can you give us a little introduction to the piece, who it's for, who's performing, what you were thinking about, some useful intro stuff?
Yeah. So this kind of originated as a final project for a class I was taking last fall on post-colonial theory, mostly Fanon. And so I wanted to do there was one text that we read that I was inspired by, and it was about how during the Algerian Revolution, one of the tactics that the revolutionaries used was jamming radio signals, and how so they used the radio to communicate important news, since the French would the French would block the signals, and so it was this kind of sonic warfare. And I was also super inspired by this techno duo called Drexia. They're Afrofuturist, and they have a mythology tied to their music, where they're this is the music that would come from if the slaves who jumped ship on the Middle Passage, if they survived and created this underwater world and became just beyond human. So I was really inspired by those two things, and being a classically trained violinist, I wanted to think about jamming signals, making things indiscernible, and just difficult to make out. So I did that with the cadenza from the Tchaikovsky concerto, which is iconic violin piece. So this piece, is starting from my own playing around with the cadenza, and then going in and adding effects. But I think that I would want to extend it for just an acoustic or electric instrument, and then real-time distortion or delay effects. So this is still being worked on. But yeah, that's kind of
So you performed, so you've taken the cadenza. Did you perform it in its entirety and then mash it up, or you've been like making your own cadenza of the cadenza and then adding stuff to it?
Yeah, it wasn't like cut up. I performed it actually for my senior recital, like the concerto. And so I just have spent like a lot of time with the piece. And so like the improv that comes out of it is just from like me deciding to like meditate on a certain like passages in the cadenza and then like extending those phrases or like messing with them just on my violin. And then what I did was like I took that entire like 10-minute recording and then used effects and like did the effects and like chopped it up and put it on top to disrupt like that improv. So yeah.
Cool.
All
right, let's take a listen.
Okay.
And then we'll talk.
Thanks.
It was really beautiful. It was a very intriguing and disruptive journey, which I think is exactly what you, the intention of the project is. And I think I'm imagining that this would be, I'm imagining, two things. One is that it would be really interesting for you to develop a live processing practice with a live setup, perhaps using Ableton and a system of pedals, where this could be like your thing that you do, you know, so you could either play a set of just like, oh, I'm gonna like take cadenzas and disrupt them. But I could imagine like an even more subversive act would be to try to pitch this, that you actually do this, like you're playing the Tchaikovsky violin concerto, and then this is what you do with the cadenza, kind of like, and it's just, I think people would be into it. You know, the cadenza is this place for creative expression, right? You know, like you can write your own cadenza, and you can improvise your own cadenza. And I think like that's exactly what you're doing. And I think it's almost more interesting that you're taking like the established versions of that and chopping and yeah, just kind of putting a mirror against what they are and maybe calling them out of date too. And to have that framed around the established repertoire contextualizes it, and yeah, I think it does something very special. And we, like, you know, there's still recognizable fragments. Like we know what we're listening to, even without the rest of the concerto around it. But I could imagine that framing could add a whole other dimension to the project. The other thing I was thinking would be, okay, you should make an album where you take like your top 5 favorite cadenzas across the repertoire and do this to them. And so that would entail, like, you know, really developing a practice around it, and then kind of figuring out what the sound worlds and the techniques for this improv, the acoustic improv version, and then the electronic improv version, what would it be? And so that not each concerto did the same, like each cadenza wouldn't do the same thing. You would have a variety of sonic worlds that you could go into. So I mean, I think that the fact that, like, yeah, to think about your musical influences and what you're listening to and what you're reading, and maybe start to like keep a running list of this and like categorize and group these things as like techniques and sounds in your head that you might want to bring into your own improv practice. You know, improvisation and composition are really similar and different. You know, we all have a toolkit that we develop in both of these practices as separate things, and there's a place where they overlap as well, because, you know, what is composition really other than improvisation that we just mull over until we're like, oh, this is like the exact version of the improvisation I want, in some ways. And so there's an on the cusp version of improvisation, but that doesn't mean that you haven't, you know, we practice it, and you practice it so you have a fluency in what are, you know, the tools that you can pull up, or how do you respond to events. And so you have to develop, like, this takes years to develop a very rich practice that's based on this. And so, you know, yeah, taking your extra musical influences and thinking about, like, you know, like when you're listening to techno, like here, you know, like distortion, I can see like distortion is a big thing for you. And this, I would imagine like difference tones would be something else, you know, acoustically that you could explore too. And bow pressure techniques, and like intonation and spectral harmonies and that kind of stuff as a way to acoustically do some of the things that you want to do electronically, right? So to find this like ground in between them. So if you're like, okay, I want to use distortion, how could we also, like, how could you create distortion with your instrument? Like, let's say there was no electronics, what would you do to make distortion? And then what happens if you like electronically process distortion, or like equalization, right? That's another thing. you know, as a violinist, you're constantly EQing, because everything you do with bow technique, when you go between ordinario, sul tasto, sul ponticello, all of this is EQing. You know, you're saying like, oh, we're filtering out certain frequencies, and that's like what makes the timbre changes. You know, your left hand is in the same place, but the sounds are so different. It's electronic processing. It's the same thing. So these are two examples, but to start to think, you know, to be like, okay, like what else do you like? You know, you probably, I really like in the last third of the, before the ending of the improv, there's this rhythmic section that comes in. We actually hear these rhythmic patterns with short percussive sounds, and that's like that's a new textural element in the fabric. And I found that really like enticing and curious, and I had to like listen between the texture to get in there, and that intrigued me a lot. So, you know, like what would be some rhythmic elements that you could play with in you know, and looking to non-Western classical music as ways to gather this information, like, you know, who, like, what is your sound world and who are you, and how do you characterize those things both in the electronic way, and then how do you mimic those with your body and with your instrument, and start to, you know, you could label them. You could have like, that's technique number 1, or you could call it like, that's technique apple, and that's technique grape, and that way you can call in your head these different types of action that you can place upon the music that you're playing in real time. Have you started to, do you, what are you using for the electronic stuff right now in your DAW? Which DAW are you using?
That was GarageBand, I believe. I have Ableton Lite now. Yeah, I'm like currently in the process of like getting, you know, a pickup for my violin and like getting pedals and stuff like that, but very much in the beginning process. So yeah, that was
this is
all
cool.
Yeah.
So this, you know, just like be prepared, like buckle up, like this is a journey. And you know, like the other thing is like, don't think that you have to get all this expensive gear and then be like, I have the gear, now the music is going to come out. You know, you can make really cool stuff with like not expensive gear. And that's why I'm saying, like, also think about, you know, just you and your fiddle, how can you do some of these sounds without even all the other bells and whistles, as like another place to build this language. And to not, like, I don't want you to be like, don't, like, this is a cool thing and you should do it. Like, don't get hung up because you're like, oh, well, I'm a good violinist and like this is like slow and it's not working. You know, it's just like when you were a kid and you started to play, like, you know, there were periods of time where it wasn't so great. You know, you have to kind of work through that, and get there. And, you know, 10,000 hours with time, and persistence. I think that this could be a really interesting way for you to amplify, quite literally, your practice, and to, you know, expand your musical voice and character as a performer, as an improviser, and as an electronic musician. And to, you know, it gives you, it's like giving a prosthetic to you as a violinist, where you're like, oh, now I have like all of these other options that I can employ to express what you want to say. And that's really exciting. But, you know, you're gonna like, basically you're like, okay, now I have like 40 arms. How do I use them? I don't know. So the first thing you have to be is like, how do I use like one extra one? And so you start really like with etudes, really like, you know, slowly, like what happens if you work with delay? What happens if you work with distortion? What happens if you work with pitch shifting? What happens if you work with feedback? You know, just these are some examples of, and you know, and like to be like, okay, now I'm going to do like a section of this concerto where the only thing is going to be feedback or delay lines, until you get like, you feel really comfortable in those spaces, and then you can call them up on the fly. And there are, you know, I can email you with some recommended links to tutorials where you can learn stuff about, if you're going to do Ableton as your preferred setup. I have issues, for the record, with Ableton because it's really expensive. But I think that for what you want to do, it has a very facile interface. And they're like really nice and quite simple ways for you to control and get it running while you are hands-free, also, being a violinist at the same time. But I don't know. I do have some ethical issues with how expensive it is. But, it's a journey that you can take on slowly. And I think the fact that you should continue recording yourself and taking that audio as input and playing in the DAW and really exploring all of the different ways that you can process your sound. Like, it's like something that's really cool about working with electronics is you can make stuff you can basically, whatever you input into the signal chain, you can turn it into anything once you have enough technique available to you. And you can also totally erase it. So you can make it really, really big and you can totally erase it, or you can take white noise and then sculpt it down to just one tone and make chords and stuff out of it. So it's a very facile playground. And yeah, I'm excited for you.
Thanks. I am too. Yeah, I appreciate what you said about that you mentioned etudes. Yeah, I think that, etudes are it's so interesting because there's specific things written for practice, and then there's also using pieces of I don't want to say actual repertoire because people do perform etudes, but how those you're also, I don't know, how actual repertoire is also, that's kind of space for practice in an etude kind of meditative way. And I think that my tendency is to have an idea and then be cool, I have this idea, and then run away from it and think that I have to move on very quickly. And I think so I appreciate your excitement for me. It encourages me to stay in that space a little longer.
Yeah, and I think one of the things with when you're doing anything with electronics is you can get carried away and be the whole world is possible, and it becomes overwhelming. I think this idea of really little focus and maybe actually going into making etudes on etudes might be a interesting way to start, right? Because what you could do in the etude is you as a violinist and musical pedagogue, you can be okay, what is this etude getting me to do? What is it an etude about, right? And identify that. And sometimes, it's not just one thing. Sometimes there are many things. It can be, an etude could be a musical thing and a physical thing all at the same time. What are the different things that you can isolate in this etude? And then say to yourself, okay, now let me pick one or two isolated electronic processes or improv processes, and work at the same time and be okay, how am I gonna etude the etude? Because it's going to give you very limited material to work with. And I think that one of the things is when we have walls built around us, we have to be really creative to get out of them. When everything is possible, we're kind of I don't know what to choose. What should I work with? I don't know. But if you you have to put yourself in this little box, then you have to be how do I get out? And that's you have to start to do a lot of problem solving. And this might also couple a direct relationship between the way that you think of performance and the way that you're going to think of improvisation and the way that you're going to think of electronic processing.
Yeah.
Right. What if you took, I don't know, what etude, but you're okay, and whatever I do, I have to add, every time I go through a passage, I have to add a pitch that's not part of the scale. and I have to like leap to somewhere crazy in the register,
Hmm.
right? As a kind of subversive act, right? And then you could make the other decision. You'd be like, okay, what if I was going to do something like bitonality, and actually where I have to leap in the other extremes is actually an entire coded message of its own. That's another piece that you could write.
Hmm. Yeah. It's
And
very
get pretty
conducive to
crazy.
so many ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, would you have like did you have like any thoughts on like the visual component that like I know it came later, but
Oh, I think it's really, so I think, yeah, maybe we can put this score up on the screen. So first, actually, let's read this text. Connie, do you want to read it?
oh sure. Render this indiscernible, to render, to see no longer, to fail to recognize, to fail, to make over.
And now let's see the next page. Okay, so do you want to describe what you did here?
Yeah, so originally I was thinking of doing something kind of like what Diana did, which is like have the physical paper, like cut it up, or do a kind of like blackout, whiteout kind of idea with it. But I did not have like scanner or printer, so I was like, okay, let me just do this online. So I just put like a copy of like the Cadenza, the Tchaikovsky Cadenza, and then like just put it through like a distortion like thing, like free distortion editor online, and then with a couple of the phrases that I knew that I was like improvising off of, I did some like overlay with that, and that's what this is.
Would
Yeah.
you describe this as something that describes the sounds that you recorded, or something that you would look at for inspiration next time you were to play this live? Like, is it a score or is it a visualization?
I think because the recording came before the visual aspect, this is definitely a visualization, but I was thinking about how it I mean, because so far we've been talking about this project as an extremely like specific to me thing, but I was thinking it could be something that I like keep in mind if I wished to like open that experimentation up for anyone else to like play around with. So yeah, so I also wanted to play around with like which areas of the page like mean what in terms of time, because I think like what I put in the middle is like one of the first things that I did. I don't know, and just thinking like spiraling out. I'm not really sure, but yeah, definitely this is definitely visualization. I'm not sure how it might translate into a score later on, but yeah.
So this might be, another like etude like exercise to explore, is to, to start to play with existing repertoire and to play visually, and then to ask yourself, how do I interpret this graphic score that actually has notation in it? Like how do you read this, and how does the composition on the page influence how you think of time, where you would start, how you would unfold? Like, I do see this as really starting with the central image, the two E's, and then spinning around clockwise
Yeah.
off the page. So, in a very like a snail, like a shell like pattern. And I think that there are some inherent attributes of the way that you've made this, and the distance between the distorted pulling of the pages, that makes us feel the motion in that way. But if you wanted something else, like what would you do? So you could start to make some of these representations, and you could play with it, and then you could ask other people to look at it as well, just like I was talking with Julie, you know, to really start to explore when you put something on a page, is there a correlation between, like, you know, some kind of random selection of your friends and how they interpret it without you saying anything, to kind of to start to learn what this does and how much do you care about the differences in other people's interpretations and how you're going to fit that into your compositional practice. You know, and another question is, like, in this kind of score, like, would you specify the sorts of electronic techniques that one would use, or is the score supposed to influence you know, somebody to make those decisions on their own?
I think that I would be leaning towards the second option, especially because, like, the written instructions, like, on the page preceding this one, like, there's no, like, use this effect or something like that. Yeah, I don't know. I think maybe it was also, like, me thinking about, like, you know, the access to, like, those things, like piece of technology. Like, not everyone has, like, that stuff. But yeah, still able to, like, utilize things in your own, like, instruments idiom or, like, whatever to, like, produce those effects, like what you're saying, if I didn't have electronics. So yeah, definitely still lots of questions to be answered about, like, how specific to get with some things. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that you're just at the edge of opening an entire world for yourself here. And so I think, you know, you've unzipped a little bit, just keep unzipping it. And you know, you have like a decade of exploration inside here. So just don't run away from it. I think there's a lot to unpack. And there's a lot of historic repertoire in the world of improvisation and graphic and alternate score practices that I think that you could just really start diving into. And off this, I can, you know, give you some recommendations. I'm sure that you're looking into a lot of this stuff on your own, to just start to, you know, bring into focus the traditions that have been happening for a century now in these realms, and, you know, with the kind of experiments and risks that other people have taken, and how some of this has become actually, like, practice and canonized in certain music communities. And you know, I think you'll find like-minded souls there.
Cool.
Okay, we're getting a prompt in the text chat for a group conversation. Now we're all of the mentees can respond to each other's work. So I'm not sure if, Megan, you're going to bring everybody on here or how that's going to work.
Yeah, so anyone, any of the mentees that are still around, we can bring them all on stage. And for anyone out there watching the stream, if you have any questions for either the mentees, any of the three of them, or for Nina, or any sort of general questions, you know, that you want to hear us talk about, feel free to put them in the chat and we will look at those. But I also want to open it up for the three of you to ask any questions that you might have for each other, or for Nina, or whoever wants to just jump right in.
Well, I want to say you're all pretty cool and just shared really, really powerful work, and with very, very individual voices. But I think all three of you are touching some similar. There's, like, you know, it's a really beautiful Venn diagram of where there are overlaps. It's very cool.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking that as well as we were listening to each of the pieces. It felt like there was it was such an interesting group of pieces because they each have so much uniqueness about them, like that they're obviously very different in a lot of ways, but I was feeling a kind of common thread also. And I think it worked great as a sort of program for the evening.
I guess I'll just say thanks, Nina. It was really nice to hear your kind of take, and thanks, Connie and Diana, for such really cool pieces, and thanks, Megan and everyone who organized. I am very excited for Connie's Cadenza Reimagined album. I will save 10 Bandcamp dollars aside for that when it comes out, or more, depending. And the other is, Diana, I think maybe improvisation came up with some of what we were talking about, and I wonder if that's part of your practice at all, or how you kind of think about that.
I don't know. I mean, I kind of improvise. I'm like, I don't know. I'm kind of afraid. I'm not afraid of improvising, but I don't know. I'm afraid of improvising in front of other people. But yeah, I mean, I guess I improvise when I compose because that's how you compose. But yeah.
So you play when you're composing, you play it in, or you improvise in your mind?
I usually sing, actually. I get most of my ideas like either like walking by myself, like I take a lot of walks and I like sing voice memos into my phone. Or sometimes I get like a lot of ideas like singing in the shower. And so I don't know. I do a lot of singing with like composing.
Thanks for sharing that. I love knowing that.
Julie, I had a question just for you. I mean, I think that your whole concept of like breathing and playing and like connecting that is really cool. And I noticed that you've kind of done that idea with this piece and your last piece, and they were both piano pieces. I was just wondering if you ever thought about doing that with like non-piano instruments, because I think that'd be like a really interesting concept, and it would interact differently with other instruments, especially with wind players, because I play flute. So I know that breath is like a huge thing for wind players, and I feel like it would have like a different sort of feeling with another instrument.
That's cool. I didn't know you played flute. It's funny because there were like 3 piano breathing pieces, and I was thinking it'd be really funny if I had the third one done in time for the third mentor session. So it's like every piece is actually just like a different take of the same exact idea. It's yet to be determined if that is possible. But the wind thing feels a little bit like a little intrusive to tell a wind player how to breathe, because that's so much a part of your technique and a part of like how you're trying to produce those sounds that I almost like don't want to interfere with it, kind of. And it with like piano or like strings or something, it's ancillary enough. Ancillary? I don't think I've said that word out loud before. Enough that it feels like it's safe to kind of like play with it without, like, if I told a pianist like you have to hold your hands a certain way, I guess anyway, I don't know. It's a really good question. I would feel presumptuous telling a wind player how to breathe, but maybe I'll send you some ideas and you could tell me, no, don't do that. I like that idea.
Total side point, but I would absolutely love a mentee collab, sometime in the future. That sounds excellent.
I could start a band.
All right. Well, any last thoughts from anyone on screen or anyone in the chat? And if not, I think we could probably just wrap up here. Thank you all so much for sharing your work and your thoughts. And it was really, really just a really excellent evening. I want to just draw everyone's attention one more time to our next couple public events as part of the mentorship program. So next Tuesday, October 26th, we have our virtual solo instrument composition workshop for violin. We're going to hear works of young women and gender marginalized composers aged 13 to 18, writing works for solo violin. And then on November 15th, we're going to have another event just like this one. Same three composers presenting their works, but this time for another one of our mentors, Inti Figisizweta. And I think that's all for this evening. Thank you all so much once again. And
This was great, everybody.
Thanks all. Have a good night.